Hi, it's Dwyer. It is June 18th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let me apologize in advance. They're doing construction around me. You're going to hear a lot of noise that's a little bit out of my control. Let's get at it. I made a video yesterday. I want to respond to some comments here where I was complaining about the odds being offered in the Canelo Terence Crawford fight, which now, by the way, will be played at the big arena where the Las Vegas Raiders play. In other words, folks, they're going to have, 60 plus thousand people in the stadium. That's going to favor Canelo even further. I know Canelo fights a lot of his fights at T-Mobile, but just understand the dynamic. It's a Mexican holiday, right? The crowd already is going to be overwhelmingly for Canelo. Right? Canelo is a cash cow fighter. Now, whereas before the crowd was going to be 20,000 people, now the crowd's going to be a multiple of that. A likely sellout. Right? As I mentioned earlier, too, you have a whole group of people who are in Vegas partying just on any random week. Right? They're in Vegas partying. And then they'll hear about the fight. Someone will find out that there are tickets available, and they'll be at the fight. Right? Now they actually have seats they can get. Before, they would need to be VIPs, or they would need to deal with the secondary market to get tickets in a 20,000, capacity arena. Now, folks, they're playing in an NFL stadium, right? So the crowd's already going to be pro Canelo. You're going to have a lot of people out celebrating the Mexican holiday. Then they'll find out that, this fight's taking place, or someone will, show up in Vegas saying, well, if tickets are available, then I'll go. Then, of course, they'll find out tickets are available, right? This fight has an added wrinkle. Normally in Vegas, you can't order pay-per-view from your hotel room. But this fight's going to be on Netflix. So there's even the possibility that the fight's going to stop everything else that's happening in Vegas. And keep in mind, Vegas is a town that has a hockey team now, obviously an NFL team, a WNBA team. Vegas is not what you remember it. Now it's a pro team mecca. Right, folks? This fight's going to stop everything. I'm guessing. The stadium is going to be packed. I'm guessing. Every place with a TV, that includes hotel rooms, that's showing Netflix, is going to have people in front of that TV watching this fight. Now let's talk about the betting spread, why I was upset. What I want to do, I'm just going to pick a recent fight. That was a title fight. That took place within the last few weeks. Right? The IBF Super Lightweight title fight that took place in New York City between New Yorker Richardson Hitchens and challenger George Kambosos. Right, now understand, this fight's at 140. It's a title fight. Kambosos at 135 beat Teofimo Lopez in the past. Right, Kambosos fought Lomachenko. In other words, Kambosos is a guy who's fought elite fighters. He fought Lomachenko at 135. He lost that fight. He then fought Jake Willie at 140. Won that fight. Then he's segueing over to fight Richardson Hitchens for the championship. Understand that at BetMGM, let's name the betting parlor. At BetMGM, in that fight, where Kambosos previously fought at 140, where Kambosos' biggest fights were just one weight class down, not two, one weight class down, right? In that fight, Richardson Hitchens, according to BetMGM, was a 10-1 favorite. Right, folks? It's not like Richardson Hitchens is undisputed at 140. It's not like Richardson Hitchens showed up, fought Rocky Fielding, beat him, fought Callum Smith, beat him, fought Caleb Plant, beat him, fought Billy Joe Saunders, beat him, went up to 175, somewhere in the mix, beat Kovalev. Right? It's not like it's not like Richardson Hitchens has anything resembling the resume of Saul Alvarez. But yet, Richardson Hitchens against Kambosos was a 10-1 favorite at BetMGM, a big book. At DraftKings, believe it or not, he got as high as 14-1. Kambosos was a plus 600 at BetMGM. A plus 600. So, I'm a firm believer that the risk takers, we can use the word gambler, we can use the word option bettor, option investor, speculator, whatever word you want to use. Understand there are risk takers all over the economy. Right? I believe the risk takers are the smartest people in the room. Right? There are many times where you see a betting line or see a, selling put option price. And when you do your research, you realize that the market is ahead of you, that they have thought about things. Market doesn't always get it right. Right now, I can't figure out why oil isn't spiking, and isn't that Israeli-Iranian military conflict now in day 6, right? But just understand, when you see a depressed line, and it is depressed, like the Canelo Crawford line, where Crawford isn't a plus 600 like Kambosos, even though if you thought about this fight a year ago, you'd be laughing at the absurdity. A welterweight who fought one fight at 154 that went the distance against Madrimov is then going to gain an additional 2 weight classes to fight Canelo. Folks, if Madrimov went the distance against Crawford at 154, what are the odds that Crawford is going to stop Canelo, who has never been stopped? Right? He's lost, but he's never been stopped at 168. Right? Are you certain, even if Crawford shows up with a lot of movement, that Crawford has the punch to hurt Canelo? If I said to you, who hits harder, Golovkin or Crawford? Right? I'm guessing Golovkin probably is going to get at least 90% of the vote. Just understand, Canelo fought Golovkin 3 times and never hit the canvas. Right? Came close in the first fight, I thought, but he never did. 12 rounds times 3, that's 36 rounds. 36 rounds. Right? Against Golovkin. Edgar Berlanga had a knockout streak. He was KOing guys in the first round. He went 12 rounds with Canelo. right? The guy who hit the canvas was Berlanga, not Canelo, right? So understand, when I looked at the odds, and Lord knows, I recognize that Crawford is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I realize that he's a great fighter. But when I look at the Crawford record, just understand, Crawford really distinguished himself. He's undisputed. He was undisputed at 140 and 147. Right? This fight's at 168. So I see Kambosos plus 600. Right? Okay, fair enough. Keep in mind, Richardson Hitchens had a very tough fight against Gus Lemos. It's not like Richardson Hitchens' unbeaten record doesn't have some wear and tear on it. Right? I see Kambosos plus 600. For this Canelo fight, even if I, am speculating, because that's what it takes, since Crawford hasn't fought at 160 or 168. If I'm speculating that Crawford is going to show up and give his usual world-class performance, for this fight, okay, maybe I discount the plus 600. Maybe I drop that to a plus 300. Right? Maybe if I am disheartened by Canelo's performance against William Skull, a guy, by the way, who was unbeaten going into that fight. Right? Maybe I drop it further. Maybe I make it a plus 250. That's not what the market's doing. Let me go one step further, too. And it's something people need to think about. It's early. The fight's still months away. Who's betting on this fight? Folks, it's experienced gamblers looking for an edge. It's the same group that's betting right now on NFL futures. Right? Casual fans, they show up in late August in Vegas to bet NFL futures. Right? You and I know there's a group of gamblers around you who right now are targeting games. They're betting futures right now. Right? They're looking at Keenan Allen and they're wondering, wow, where's he going to sign? Right? They're writing down, Devontae Adams, Mr. Taco Bell. He's with Matthew Stafford and the Rams. Right? Sean McVay right now is doing cartwheels. Right? So are some gamblers. In a division, by the way, where the Niners are actually favored. The Rams aren't even favored to win their division. Right? That's the group. That's the group right now that's betting on this fight. Right? It's the repeat player gambling money. So when you see Crawford at plus 150, folks, understand you're in a neighborhood that you're not in for the Richardson Hitchens Kambosos fight. I was expecting to see Crawford up around a minus 300. Right? I was shocked, plus 150. Right? Crawford being given a 40% chance in a fight where he's fighting a guy who's never been stopped. 2 weight classes up from the heaviest weight division he's fought in. Right? Understand, too, just the dynamic of the fight. And it's something that needs to be thought of. Canelo is a guy with spectacular head movement. It's very hard to hit Canelo in the head. Right? Canelo is a guy who has some fights. The Rocky Fielding fight. The Liam Smith fight. Where he just came forward and took out his opponent's body. Right? Was just on a seek and destroy mission. Now in a fight where he's the cash cow, he's the incumbent, if he's coming forward and Crawford isn't able to stagger him, isn't able to materially hurt him, make him pay for coming forward, right? And if Canelo is just active, right, he's coming forward and he's throwing punches, even if Crawford's running away. Let's say Crawford looks like Shakur Stevenson, his good friend, looked against Edwin De Los Santos, right? Let's say, in fact, let's say Crawford looks like one of his nemesis, Jermell Charlo, did against Canelo. In other words, you're watching the fight and Jermell Charlo's moving a bit too much, right? He's moving away from Canelo. Canelo is hunting him, and the guy who's being hunted isn't returning fire, doesn't get a knockdown, is moving away from Canelo the whole fight. Folks, it's almost impossible to beat Canelo under those circumstances, isn't it? Right? Let me say this too, and I know this is going to sound like heresy, but I actually said it in an earlier video. Arthur Beterbiev has been making a mistake in his fights against Bivol. Right? Now understand what side of the street I'm on. I thought Bivol won the first fight. I picked Bivol to beat Beterbiev. Bivol, of course, was not awarded the first fight. Right? But understand, if you look at the Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran fight, the first one, not No Mas, but the first one, you'll notice that Duran is outside, rather than the Beterbiev strategy, which is slow, constant pressure. Right? Beterbiev's on his front foot. He's daring you to try to tilt him to his back foot. He's coming forward. He's not running after you. He's just slowly coming forward at a measured pace. That doesn't work against Dmitry Bivol. What might work is a guy who's outside, like Duran was against Ray Leonard, and then he jumps inside. He's picking an entry point, right? It's the guy who can run over to you and throw punches, who makes a decision, right? Justice Honey, right? Brother's learning. One of the problems he had at the end of the Fabio Wardley fight is you knew he was going to come inside. That's a problem, right? When you know the other guy's game plan. Then, of course, he came inside in a lackadaisical way, right? He wasn't bobbing and weaving. He didn't come in all armored up. He wasn't sudden, right? Fabio Wardley, a puncher, knew this guy is going to try to walk inside right now. He made him pay for trying to enter the pocket there, right? Let's say Canelo, and the key fight to watch, because it's a jaw dropper, is the Golovkin rematch, right? I can tell you, I was at a Hooters, which sadly is no longer with us. I was at a Hooters. It was a Canelo crowd, right? I just knew Golovkin was going to beat Canelo. And everyone on my side of the bar was absolutely astonished when Canelo came in and was front foot against Golovkin, right? And Canelo was doing things like throwing big punches. He would just lead with huge shots. And you thought, you gotta be kidding me. What if Canelo does that here? What if Canelo says, hey, look, I'm going to stand outside, have this guy circle me, then I'm going to try to jump on him, right? Understand, Crawford cannot allow himself to be over by the ropes. He has to be in the middle of the ring circling Canelo. right? He can't beat Edgar Berlanga against Canelo. We saw how that turned out for Berlanga, right? I want viewers to go back, look at the knockdown Canelo gets against Berlanga, and look at where Berlanga is, right? If you want to get stopped by Canelo, go ahead and hang out by the ropes, right? So Canelo knows where Crawford's going to be. Canelo knows Crawford can't be front foot. He knows all this. The bettors, and they're savvy bettors, they're telling you that something's going on here, that there is some dynamic in this fight that warrants not a plus 600 line like you got with Kambosos at BetMGM. Right? By the way, DraftKings on this Richardson-Hitchens fight had Hitchens as a 14-1 favorite. Right? Something's going on where you have unusual facts here. Right? A guy jumping multiple weight classes against a dude who's an obvious first ballot Hall of Famer, who's hard to hit, who has a chin. It's not even like Canelo's Donald Curry, where you're thinking, man, if you hit him the right way, this guy might go down. Right? He's not even that guy. He's a guy with great defense who has a chin. And you're telling me experienced gamblers, the early gamblers, have bid Crawford down to a plus 150. That's bizarre. Right? That can only be summed up as bizarre. Now let's talk about, someone made an excellent point. They said, look, if you believe in Canelo, then aren't you thrilled that you're getting Canelo at a minus 175? Right? Or as a guy from Canada pointed out in the comment section, a minus 176. Whatever, right? Minus 175-ish. Right? Aren't you thrilled? Wouldn't you be disappointed if you actually had to pay, a higher price, right? Richardson Hitchens, for example, at 10-1, that's not doable. Well, let me say, I am disappointed because I'm a hedge better, right? A straddler. I'm betting situations, right? You know what I like to say, don't fall in love with a fighter. I'm betting situations. Now, if Crawford were a plus 600, if the public saw this differently, right? I think everyone realizes that if Jermell Charlo were to fight Canelo again, and Charlo was coming up from 154, right? Charlo was undisputed at 154. Unlike Crawford, who has one belt at 154 off his one fight that went the distance, and that was a competitive fight. Right? We understand promoters aren't completely neutral. But Eddie Hearn was very upset with the scoring of that Madrimov-Crawford fight. In other words, Crawford fought at 154. Let's say he didn't look like Murtazaliev looked against Tim Tszyu. Right? He did not look definitive. Not only that, you look at 154, he fought Madrimov. It's not like he went to 154 and he fought Murtazaliev or Fundora, the gatekeepers in the weight class. Right? He didn't fight the very best at 154, and the guy he fought, he didn't look at his best. Right? So let's say Crawford were a plus 600 or a plus 300 for this match. Folks, that would loosen up the possibilities. I'm not a side bettor. In other words, I don't look at a fight and say, oh, Canelo's going to win this. No, I'm looking at outcomes. Now, I'm aware of the fact that Crawford can move well. Crawford has the better legs than Canelo. Crawford is unbeaten, has never been stopped in a fight. Right? So understand, had Crawford been a plus 300, that would have opened the door to a bet where I could have thought, you know what, I don't think Canelo is going to catch up to Crawford for at least 6 or 7 rounds. I could have then played in the world of over-unders, right? Because, of course, I could have made a base bet on Crawford simply to lock in a plus 300, right? Then I could have said, okay, great. Let's say I bet $10 on Crawford at a plus 300. In other words, if I win that bet, I get 30. Then I could say, hey, you know what? Let me take 15 of that. 15 of that. And let me bet, that the fight goes past the first 6 rounds. Understand, these days in the digital world, you actually have graduated over-unders, right? Where, it's no longer over-under 7.5. Now they change the odds and you can get 7.5. You can get sometimes more advantageous odds at over 8.5. I can bet 6.5, etc. I could have made a bet and said, hey, this fight makes it to the start of the 7th round. And I could have bet $15 on that. Then I could have bet, other money on Canelo by KO to get around the higher odds on Canelo. Understand, that would cover me for Canelo winning by decision after the over-under, right? By decision would mean the fight necessarily went over. Assuming this isn't that, injury, go to the scorecard, very rare situation. And of course, I'd be able to fool around with some money that I would win if Crawford wins on a Canelo by KO prop. Right, folks? Sometimes that's where the real action is. Here you can't do that because Crawford's a plus 150. In other words, I don't have a cushion that I would have. Betting on Crawford at, a plus 300, or if he were viewed as much of an underdog as George Kambosos, as a plus 600. Right here, you have to pick a side. And the problem is, the Canelo side of the ledger, well, let me say this first. The prop that the fight goes the distance, it's a shocker. It's a minus 333. I thought there'd be some question on whether the fight went the distance. Right? A 154 guy fighting at 168. Folks, you just saw Tim Tszyu get knocked down multiple times by Murtazaliev. Right? If Tim Tszyu were to sign a fight, and keep in mind, I'm talking about an elite 154 guy. Right? A guy who's had some big wins at 154. If Tim Tszyu were to sign to fight Canelo, right, you would imagine that, the prop that the fight goes the distance, you'd be getting plus money on that. Certainly better than break-even money, right, that the fight doesn't go the distance. Right, Murtazaliev looked like a world beater against Tim Tszyu. You understand, that's at 154. Right, there'd be a lot of people saying, gee, Murtazaliev, as good as he is, against Canelo, that fight goes the distance prop would have a very different price than this one. So you have smart money telling you that Canelo's going to have a hard time stopping Crawford. Folks, I'm astonished by that. Right? I'm astonished by that. You know, not only that, you have smart money telling you that Crawford, you know, a guy who fought at 154 once, I mean, once, has a 40% chance of beating a guy who has only lost to Mayweather when he was much younger. I'm telling you, Canelo's a different guy now. Right? Mayweather and Beevil. Right, folks? It's let's just say this is one of those times I'm surprised. Right? Let me also say, too, you know, it's weird times across the board. I'm surprised that oil hasn't spiked right now. Right? You're telling me that you have an air war, you know, Israel grabbing the skies over Iran, and you're telling me that, you know, with the Strait of Hormuz right by, with ships reporting, you know, problems with the jamming of radar and stuff like that, you're telling me that oil hasn't spiked? Let's say I'm astonished by that too. So, you know, it's just a very weird mid-June right now. But this Canelo fight, the pricing, wow, you've got to be kidding. Yes, I do feel deprived from the opportunity to actually be able to hedge and to be covered. Right? Let me say this too. Kambosos. I thought he was dominated. I'm not here to suggest otherwise. But Kambosos made it to the 8th round. Right? Understand, when you see prices like in this Kambosos fight, right, you really have to realize that there are a whole group of betting options, over-unders and stuff like that, that are there for the taking, that are, you know, that you can actually pursue from a covered position somewhat if you have a base bet that's paying at 6-1. And here that base bet would have been Kambosos simply to win. Right? Then you could literally fool around with all these other options. Right? Does the fight go the distance? Is this an over fight? What over-under point are you picking? Right? This Canelo fight, you don't really have those choices because you don't have the gonzo bet. Right? To me, the best bet on the board to try to gain leverage is the Crawford by decision at plus 220 because that has a realistic shot, right? An outside shot. So with the plus 220, you're expecting, you know, you have the Crawford side of the play covered, in my opinion. I'm not going to spend any money on, you know, Crawford by stoppage. That gives me a little to fool around on other props. But what other props are there to fool around on? Right? Canelo against the welterweight folks, you know, a knockout's a distinct possibility. Right? Let me point out that middleweight, James Kirkland, didn't have a realistic shot at going the distance against Canelo. Right? Just didn't. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.